Hi everyone, Josh here with Top Score Tutor. And in this video, we're going to continue along with punctuation and look at commas, and then we're going to dive into some other rules you want to know for this section. So let's get started. So commas. Commas are a big punctuation component on section 2 of the SAT. They have 4 uses in total. We've already looked at 2 of them. We've looked at them as stop punctuation, comma followed by fanboys. That makes a stop punctuation. The next one that we want to look at, of course, we looked at stop, we looked at half stop. Now we want to look at go punctuation, how commas are used to link anything except to complete sentences. So again, you use commas. Do you remember? When do you use commas? When the first sentence is incomplete. When the first sentence is incomplete. So let's look at these 2 examples, number 14 and 34 on practice test 3, section 2. So what's the first thing that we do, guys? For number 14, we got to see what's changing in the answer choices. You always compare answer choices, and we clearly see that the punctuation is changing in the answer choices. So we know we're dealing with punctuation. So what's the next thing that we do, guys? Now that we know we're dealing with punctuation, we got to draw that line. So right where the punctuation is, we're going to draw a line. And this is going to tell us we got to read before the line, and then we got to read after the line. So let's read the sentence before the line up until the word entrepreneur. So, despite having worked for railroad companies, Fred Harvey, an English-born entrepreneur, Despite having worked for railroad companies, Fred Harvey, an English-born entrepreneur, does it have a subject? Yep, Fred Harvey. Fred Harvey is the subject. What is Fred Harvey doing in that sentence? What's the predicate? What's the action that Fred Harvey is doing? He worked for railroad companies. Having worked for railroad companies, so yeah, it does have a predicate. Is it a complete thought? Read that carefully. Despite having worked for railroad companies, Fred Harvey, an English-born entrepreneur, no, it's not a complete thought. It stops abruptly. It sounds like I need to keep talking to finish my thought. So it's not a complete thought. So therefore, the first sentence is incomplete. Off that alone, if the first sentence is incomplete, what type of grammar, what type of punctuation category are we limited to? Go punctuation. So we know we need go punctuation. So what answer choices can we eliminate? Go ahead and take a look and see, press pause if you need to, see which answer choices that you need to eliminate. So we can get rid of A, because A has a period. A is stop punctuation. Choice B is a colon. That's half stop punctuation. Choice C is a semicolon. That's stop punctuation. And without even having to look at the second sentence, we know the correct answer is D, comma, not followed by a fanboy. So that's the only example of go punctuation that we have in the answer choices is choice D. Super easy, guys. So now let's look at number 34. Okay, so looking at number 34, what's the first thing that we do? We compare the answer choices to see what's changing. We clearly see that punctuation is changing between the answer choices. So what's the next thing we do now that we know that it's punctuation? We draw our line to separate the punctuation. Okay, so I want to challenge you to press pause, read the first sentence up until the word Gothic, because that's where we drew our line. Determine if it's complete or incomplete, And then from there, do process of elimination and see if you can come up with the right answer. And then press play and we'll compare notes. All right, so my first sentence. From Michelangelo's David to Vincent van Gogh's series of self-portraits to Grant Wood's iconic image of a farming couple in American Gothic. That was a mouthful. Just read that for a second and see if that sounds like a complete thought. From Michelangelo's David to Vincent van Gogh's series of self-portraits to Grant Wood's iconic image of a farming couple in American Gothic, there needs to be additional information there. It just stops abruptly because it literally started with the word from, and that's going to indicate that there's going to be additional information that is needed to complete that thought. It leaves you with a cliffhanger. We can just tell from right there that that is an incomplete sentence. The first sentence is incomplete. It doesn't stand on its own. It's not a complete thought. And besides, it does have a subject, all the artists that were named, but it doesn't have a predicate. Because what are those artists' works? What are they doing? What is Vincent van Gogh's series of self-portraits and the iconic images and Michelangelo's David? What are those all doing? They don't have any action. There's no predicate. So between not sounding like a complete thought, not having a predicate, those are all the reasons that the first sentence is incomplete. So if the first sentence is incomplete, what category of punctuation are we automatically limited to? Go punctuation. We know we need go punctuation. So choice A is stop punctuation. Choice B is stop punctuation. Choice C is also stop punctuation. Therefore, by default, we don't even need to check the second sentence. Choice D is correct. Choice D is a comma, not followed by a fanboys. Therefore, choice D is the best answer. So that's using commas in go punctuation. Let's look at the other and final two uses of commas on section 2. So commas also separate items in a list. So whenever you have a list of 3 or more things, you need to separate it with a comma. So look at this first example here. His top choice schools were Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. The 3 examples in the list is Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. Each one of those items are separated by a comma because it's a list. It's 3 or more schools listed. So super easy concept, super simple. Let's look at practice test 7, section 2, number 4. So again, guys, I'm on practice test 7 this time for this example. Question number 4. We've been working in practice test 3 for the most part. So what's changing between the answer choices, guys? The punctuation. So I know I'm dealing with punctuation. So you can quickly realize that this is a list. If you read the sentence, you can quickly realize that this is a list going on here. So with this sentence that question number 4 is dealing with, it's a long sentence. Can you find the list in this sentence? The list of 3 or more things being specifically named. Projects such as the Apollo moon missions, that's 1. The Space Shuttle program, that's 2. The Hubble Space Telescope, that's 3. And unmanned planetary exploration, that's 4. So we have a list. Each item in the list needs to have a comma immediately following it. So choice A is the best answer because it has a comma immediately following the word telescope. And remember, whenever you have a list of 3 or more things, each item needs to be separated by a comma. So again, for that reason, question number 4, the answer is A because you have a list of 3 or more things. So super easy, guys. Let's look at the last usage for commas on the SAT. So commas outline unnecessary information, okay? If you have unnecessary information, it needs to be outlined by a comma. Just remember that. If it's unnecessary, it needs to be surrounded by commas. So what is unnecessary information? Let's look at this example right here on the screen. Look at what's surrounded by the commas. Everyone seemed fairly certain, okay? That's what's surrounded by the commas. Is that unnecessary information? So to determine if it's unnecessary information, you want to read the sentence without the information that I highlighted. You want to read the sentence without the information that's between the commas. If the sentence still makes sense and the meaning of the sentence doesn't change, then yes, that is unnecessary information because we literally removed that from the sentence, reread it, and it still made sense. So Jonah, everyone seemed fairly certain, was going to get into one of those schools. Well, I have my highlighted portion that's surrounded by commas that's telling me it's unnecessary information, so let's take that out. Jonah was going to get into one of those schools. Well, that still makes sense. The meaning of the sentence didn't change, and I removed that part. So because the meaning of the sentence still makes sense, then yes, that part is unnecessary information. Let's look at a few examples. So I'm going to start with practice test 3, section 2, number 41. So looking at 41, what's changing in the answer choices? The punctuation is changing in the answer choices, but it's only the commas that are changing in the answer choice. So if I read the sentence in question and put brackets around it, the underlined portion, well, the commas are staying the same within every answer choice. So I'm not dealing with stop, half stop, and go punctuation because I would see different types of punctuation. So if I'm just seeing commas and commas only, then it has to be either a list that I'm going to be referring to or unnecessary information. And by reading the sentence, the person chose for this task, digital artist Eldar Z, painted the cats. So it's definitely not a list. There's not a list of things going on here. So I know through the process of elimination that I'm dealing with unnecessary information. Again, because there's no colons, semicolons, periods. It's not a list. So I'm not dealing with any of those comma uses. I must be dealing with unnecessary information. So I want to find that what information is considered unnecessary. What can I surround with commas, reread the sentence, and the sentence would still make sense if I left out that piece of information? So the correct answer is D. Digital artist, task, comma, digital artist, Eldar Z, comma. That's the correct answer because that makes this information surrounded by commas, okay? We have digital artist, Eldar Z, that's what's surrounded by commas. And if it's surrounded by commas, again, that means it's unnecessary information. So let me reread the sentence without that information and see if it still makes sense. The person chosen for this task painted the cat in the style traditionally used by portrait artists. In doing so, blah, blah, blah. I left out digital artist Eldar Z and the sentence still made sense. Digital artist Eldar Z, the person chosen for the task, that's unnecessary information. That's not relevant to the main idea of the sentence, which is that the person chosen for this task painted the cats in a certain way, in a style traditionally used by other artists. So that makes it unnecessary because I still reread the sentence without that information and it still made sense. So choice D is the correct answer for that reason. Let's move on to practice test number 7 and look at questions number 13 and 27. Okay, so looking at number 13, what's changing in between the answer choices? The punctuation is changing in between the answer choices, and you have different punctuation too. So it might appear, because we have different types of punctuation, periods, semicolons, let's go back to the original way we use commas for punctuation to start doing process of elimination. So we know we're dealing with punctuation. So let me read the first sentence to the left of the line and see if it's complete or incomplete. So to perform their job successfully in this dynamic environment, workers in many fields, is that complete or incomplete, guys? That's incomplete. The first sentence is incomplete. It has a subject, workers in many fields. What are the workers in many fields doing? Perform their jobs successfully in this dynamic environment. So it has a subject, it has a predicate, but it's not a complete thought. If we read it, it stops abruptly. To perform their jobs successfully in this dynamic environment, workers in many fields, it sounds like I need to keep talking. It sounds like I need to keep going. So for that reason, the first sentence is incomplete. If the first sentence is incomplete, what type of punctuation do I need automatically? I need go punctuation. So any of the answer choices that are not go punctuation, I can eliminate. So choice A is a long dash. That is incorrect. And choice D is a semicolon, which is also not go punctuation. Choice A, just to jog your memory, is half stop, and choice D is go punctuation. So now we're between B and C, which are both examples of go punctuation. So now I got to use what else I know about commas to figure this out. So the correct answer is C, because if we put a comma there, then what we're doing is making that middle part the unnecessary information. From social services to manufacturing, that has a commas surrounding it, which makes it unnecessary information. So how can we determine if it's unnecessary information? What do we do again, guys? We reread the sentence without it and see if it still makes sense. To perform their job successfully in this dynamic environment, workers in many fields must continually acquire relevant knowledge and key skills. Yes, it still makes sense without specifically saying what kind of fields those workers come from, making it unnecessary, making C the best choice. The test loves to do that. They love to elaborate a little more and expand a little more. Workers in many fields, from social services to we don't need to know what those fields actually are. That's not the main point. That's little irrelevant, unnecessary details. We need to know the big overall main idea. So that's the unnecessary information. Therefore, it needs to be surrounded by commas. Let's look at number 27. Okay, so looking at 27, what's changing in between the answer choices? The commas, but only the commas. So what are we going to be dealing with, guys? Two things, right? Either a list or unnecessary information. And if you read this, you'll realize that there's not a list going on here, because altitude and weather are just two things. A list needs to be at least how many, guys? Three things. Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, three things to be considered a list. So we know we're not dealing with stop and go punctuation. We know we're not dealing with a list. We must be dealing with unnecessary information. Take a second, pause, see if you can answer this question correctly using the exact same strategy and hint that we did on the last lesson. Remember, not going into specific nitty-gritty details, sticking to the main idea, what's considered the unnecessary information. So press pause, try to get the correct answer, then press play, and we'll compare notes. So the correct answer is B. because such as altitude and weather is the unnecessary information. We don't need such as altitude and weather. Because what that is, like the previous example, is the additional nitty-gritty details of environmental factors. Along with other environmental factors, such as altitude and weather, we don't need to know the types of environmental factors. That's unnecessary information, so it needs to be surrounded by commas. If we read the sentence without it, it would still make sense, and the main idea is definitely not such as altitude and weather. That doesn't contribute to the main idea. The main idea is that a goat ingests the vegetation particular to the meadow in which it grazes, which along with other environmental factors shapes the cheese's taste and texture. We didn't need such as altitude and weather for the sentence to still make sense. So since it's unnecessary, it needs to be surrounded by commas. So that's it for commas, guys, on section 2 of the SAT. There's many uses of them for stop punctuation, go punctuation, a list of items, and unnecessary information as well. So that concludes this video. Go ahead and continue to the next video, and we'll keep it on with the other rules and concepts for this section.